Welcome to another episode of Bloodlust Boxing. And today's episode, does boxing have a bigger drugs problem than an episode of Top Boy? We'll discuss, but I'm Sav, he's Baz, and we're joined by a special guest, Ben, to help us talk around this tricky subject. All right, Ben?
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Pleasure, mate. Pleasure.
I'm hoping I'm not going to become known as the drugs expert.
Just for anyone who doesn't know, Ben's got a background in the sports industry, so he can provide us a bit of an insight of those tricky subjects.
On the subject of Top Boy, Sav, you were in Top Boy a little bit, weren't you?
I was, yeah. I was
just a little part.
Maybe on season 1, episode 2, I think it was.
Three minutes in.
Timestamp. It was
like
6 minutes in.
and you have to pause it. You have to pause it at a specific point in time.
I don't know why I'm proud of this, but I was the chicken shop guy in one of the episodes in the first original season of Top Boy. That's my claim to fame. I served some chicken, and I think they dubbed my voice when I called out one word. So.
Man couldn't even serve chicken properly.
They had to dub my voice. That's great, isn't it?
Brilliant. That's brilliant.
But yeah, don't even get me started on all the other extra stuff I don't, because there's terrorists, illegal refugee. Go where the money is. But anyway, let's get back to the boxing. That's where the real action's at. So
exactly.
Let's get your thoughts in it. There's been quite a few boxers who've been popping recently. Last couple of weeks, we've had Robert Helenius, unexpectedly, that one. Dillian White, Alicia Baumgardner, and who's the fighter who fought Kaunaki? Who popped off as well. It's been rife. Is it Joe Cusimano? That's it.
Yeah.
And obviously we've got the infamous Conor Ben.
It's probably a year ago.
Yeah. At least a year and a half. So there's been a string of positive tests or adverse findings, and what's more of a threat to boxing, that or misfits? I don't know, but let's talk about the illicit substances. Let's get your thoughts on it, Ben.
I think this is a very grey area, to be honest. Like, I think this is something you can come at a lot of different ways. I'm not 100% sure what my opinion is. I think it's a massive ethical dilemma. I think it's potentially clearer cut as it relates to combat sports versus the general opinion of PEDs in sports.
There was today I saw an article about a female tennis player who tested positive for some illegal substances, and she's been banned, I believe, it may have been for 2 years or so. So, but then in tennis, you're not hitting someone with your fists, are you? So it has a big impact in the martial arts boxing world, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Boxing is predicated upon damage. You can't win without inflicting damage. People don't just quit because you're tippity tapping them. So as soon as you're taking performance enhancing drugs that relate to increased strength and power, and arguably even if you were to consider increased endurance, ultimately that would increase damage through quantity. And so I think whichever way you cut it, even if it was EPOs and working on, like I say, endurance, just to be able to go for longer, I think all of it equals additional damage. Yeah, provided all things considered they're landing and blah blah blah. So the big overarching differentiation between the PEDs and sports argument and PEDs and combat sports is damage and, air quotes, superhuman strength and endurance, and how that relates to lifelong damage to your opposition. We all remember, like, boxing's riddled with serious cases of brain damage, CTE in fighters that have retired. We've seen example, I think Muhammad Ali being arguably the greatest boxer of all time, and we've all seen him and the links between his conditions and boxing. But there's been deaths in the ring, and I think it's fair to say, if you look at a lot of the top boxers, and if you know anything about PEDs at all, and you know about the what the human body is usually achieves, and a lot of what you see in boxing, then you can tell that they're rife. And no sport is comfortable in talking about the PEDs in their sport, because it tarnishes it. And so I think a lot of sports try and sweep this under the carpet. I don't know if you've seen today, I think football has just been popped, which is really rare. Football.
Oh, wow.
Oh, really?
Football puts it under the carpet. I don't know if it's Paul Pogba, it's someone.
It was Paul Pogba, yeah.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And you think, how often do you hear about it going in football? I'm telling you what, it happens in all sports to a high level. But yeah, I think that
cycling's quite a big one as well, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's a problem, but there's a bunch of arguments for and against, which I guess is what we're going to talk about today. But I think the first point is you have to say there's extenuating circumstances because of damage. And the trouble is, if you make them legal, then you're taking what is already a dangerous sport and you're exasperating it. And that, ultimately none of us.
You're talking about blood sports, Ben. It's like making drugs, PEDs legal in boxing.
Yeah.
Like, where does it stop? Do you start putting glass on your fists?
I'm saying I'm against it in theory, under the you don't want to see anyone hurt for the long term.
Yeah.
But the reason this is so grey, just as an example, it's a blood sport, so it's a spectacle sport, right? So you want to see the best, you want to see the top of human performance, right? What is the best that can be achieved? How that someone can go for longer, they can take more damage, they can give more damage, and ultimately that's also a degree what we see. Let's be honest, most people's favourite fights, the connoisseurs like to watch people that don't get touched and are very defensive and much more technical. But Joe Bloggs wants to see two people go to war toe to toe, not moving. One looks like they're knocked out, then they get back up and they're fighting. Like, for example, Fury and Wilder, that's probably one of the biggest fights in recent years. It's all about adversity and overcoming it, etc. And so, PEDs pays into that fairly significantly. But then, arguing against it, it's about, if you don't have PEDs, if you ban them, how do you then police it? Because the designer drugs are always going to be ahead of the testing, and therefore, if you don't allow it, there's the moral dilemma of what's the implications to the good guys. It's like saying you can't have guns in this country. Well, that's great, but the criminals will have them anyway. So you're only penalising people that follow the rules, and that kind of philosophy for me transfers into PEDs. You ban them, but it's the cheats will use them still.
I think the type of conversation you're having now is something that no one is really talking about, or they're scared to talk about it at this level. Obviously, PEDs in boxing is bad, but then on the flip side, like you said, what happens to the ones which aren't taking it, who are fighting someone that maybe has had it? So
this is what we're starting to see now, isn't it? Really, I mean, with Matchroom up in their testing game, more people getting found out. But then you've got the people who aren't really testing, like your
promoters.
Yeah, the other promoters. And I mean, even the other day, the Chris Eubank against Liam Smith fight, that wasn't VADA tested, and
they used UCAD, didn't they?
Yeah, and UCAD. If it was down to UCAD, they would have passed Conor Benn to fight.
That's a good point. Yeah,
you got to look at these other promoters need to be pulled up and need to be held accountable, because if we're gonna try and make the sport as clean as possible, then there's no point one or two promoters doing it. They all need to do it, and they all need to stick to it. And there needs to be a governing body that which actually puts their foot down, does something about it, and within a good space of time, not 6 months, not 10 months. It needs to be within short space of time. But is the funding there?
Well, this is the problem. So obviously within boxing, you've got different belts, different sanctioning bodies. It's different jurisdictions. It's a mess, really. And you've got the issues, say, for example, with Dillian Whyte now, who's had an adverse finding through his VADA test. That was something he's had to opt into as part of the fight with Joshua.
Yeah.
And the question is, who makes a decision on punishment, because he's licensed under Portugal, from what I believe. So he's not a British boxing board license holder. So who makes that decision then as to what happens next, and how strict are certain bodies going to be on certain situations? If they're getting their sanctioning fees, are they likely to be as strict as other boards? So,
and if fights are getting cancelled over it, I mean, who's paying for that? Insurance companies? Not many insurance companies are going to want to pay a couple of mil. They'll go bankrupt.
Eddie Hearn said this the other day with the Chris Eubank Jr. fight. If anyone tested positive in that fight, obviously the headlines like Liam Smith or Chris Eubank Jr., then boxer could effectively be severely impacted financially and could have a big impact on them. So would they even want to know? So
I think that it is, as you look at PEDs, the whole system needs addressing, because if you're going to have testing, and I don't know if you two paid attention when they brought in heavy testing into the UFC, they have a UFC funded program.
Who funds that? Is that down from the promoter? Is that
right?
The UFC is the promoter.
Yeah.
Pay. They have a set fee. I don't know what it is more recently, but they basically allocate a set amount each year. I think it's USADA in the UFC. And it's like 4 years of just popping, bang, 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 bang. Wow. And it was insane. And I think that there was a big pain period. It was significant, and I think the UFC has its. It was a desire of the UFC to maintain their 0 deaths relative to boxing. So obviously it's a much younger sport. I think it's far too early in the genesis of mixed martial arts as a sport to decide whether it's any more dangerous or less dangerous. The argument is it's less dangerous because it's smaller gloves, and therefore the body shuts down quicker and takes less accumulative damage than boxing.
Really?
Pads. Yeah, because if you've got smaller pads, you get knocked out quicker, so it seems more severe. But
what
actually,
elbows and stuff like that, knees to the head,
you get knocked out quicker. Whereas with boxing, with the additional padding,
sustained damage in it. Yeah,
it takes sustained damage, and you have counts. So in UFC, where you'd have a count in boxing, you would have the fight called off in MMA. So I think that as a desire to minimize that risk and protect the fighters, let's say altruistically, they lent into that program, but they've got all the advantages of essentially pretty much, there are competitors, but they're very small. They basically have a monopoly on the sport, so they're generating most of the revenue, whereas in boxing, as you've alluded to, it's heavily diversified cross promotions. You've got a lot of mess in terms of who regulates, whereas in America, where my fights are essentially put on, there are nuances, but there's a unified set of rules. And generalizing, there might be some outlier exceptions, but in general, each state will adhere to the rulings of another state. So they're unified despite being separate. So I think that in boxing, you would need a unification and everyone to sign up to something. And bear in mind, I think that the promoters and the sport is disincentivized to do that, because you're risking big money fights, and it's ultimately going to penalize you for a few years. And then for me, you need to heavily address the legal process for what happens when people do pop. Are you innocent until proven guilty? I.e., how do you do that? Do you call the fight off, as we've seen Ben, we talked about as a big example, but there's loads of examples, right? Do you call the fighter off? Do you give them innocent until proven guilty, in which case you're letting someone that's popped go into a fight? It's a very complicated issue. They publicize this information relatively quickly, so there's the risk of the mud sticking to innocent people. We've got heavily improved testing. Now, you will never beat the cheats, because you just create a new designer drug, you change a molecule.
There'll be a new masking material or something, won't they?
100%. And there's also, as we've seen, as the sensitivity of tests has improved, you can now pop for something that is categorically not performance enhancing, but it's a banned substance. And that could come from a container that was used in a country abroad to generate your creatine powder or your protein powder. And it's like nano quantity of some substance, but in a highly sensitive test, it's going to pop. Now you look guilty for something you haven't done. And Baz, you said about the duration of these things. The problem is the top sports people keep a record of everything, right? They say what supplement they've taken, what they are. They keep batch numbers, of each of the product. Then that allows whoever the authority is to go and get some of those batches and blah blah blah. But that takes a lot of time. That's a full process.
And if you're lower down the food chain, I can't see these smaller fighters who have only had 1, 2 fights, 3 fights. They're not really going to be that hot on it, are they, realistically?
Well, this is the problem I think we found, that if you're, as you said, lower down the food chain and you're not backed by a big promoter, you're not got that name, and you're sort of Joe Bloggs who's just 2 fights in, if you test positive for something, then you're not going to have the ability to fight it as well as some of the bigger names. And that's where you can see, obviously, when you look at the Conor Benn situation, how many hundreds of thousands he's probably spent on trying to clear his name, and they've almost sort of circumvented it and gone around it in certain ways. But as I said, your normal Joe Bloggs is not going to be able to do that, are they? And they'll get a big fight.
Yeah, they'll just get banned, wouldn't they?
And get banned. So, yeah, I think the other problem is, as well as you mentioned there, Ben, was the levels of certain substances, and is it performance enhancing, isn't it? And with tainted supplements, that kind of thing. As you said, the testing is so good now that is it picking up something which it probably shouldn't be picking up in a way, because it's
something that won't make no difference.
Picograms, literal picograms. It's like it's smaller than we can get our heads around, but you can pop for it now, and it's something they couldn't have tested for.
Yeah, and there is you see in your normal day to day. I mean, I see it every day in the news. Recalls when it comes to certain foods, for example. Like you can go into Sainsbury's, buy something, and see a week later that it's been recalled because it's been tainted with something that it shouldn't have in there, like some sort of milk substance or nuts where it shouldn't be in there. It's just it seems to be a lot of that going on at the moment. So who's to say that's not going to happen with other substances? But I think the thing for me is, you've got those people that are drugs cheats where it's undeniable that they've definitely got something in their system.
Your Millers. Your Millers
baby
of the world.
Millers, he's had about 10 different substances in there, allegedly. Well, not allegedly, I think
it's proven.
Evidence. And it was proven that he was from what we understand, that he was injecting stuff into himself. You've got that level of cheat, or maybe they're just not as good enough at hiding it. But
so do you have grey areas? How do you play this then?
It's clear cut with those kind of people. You need to give them like a 4-year, 5-year ban straight off the bat if it's a first offence, and then if it's second offence and they're testing positive for something similar, then for me it's got to be a lifetime ban, surely.
Why do you think of arbitrary number? How do you come up with a 4 or 5 year ban? So and the reason I ask that, just to challenge it and play devil's advocate, I don't know about you boys, but I've made some mistakes in my life, done some things I have, and come out the other side. If you're a boxer, that's all you are.
Career. Yeah.
See, I'll back up on this one, and I'll say this because usually most fighters, especially if you come into the higher end, because let's be honest, they're going to be the ones that are going to pop the most, is the ones who are at the top of the game, because they're going to have the more testing. They're going to really only be fighting once, maybe twice a year. So even if you're banned for 2 years, you might only fight once or twice in those 2 years anyway.
Yeah.
So if you at least had a 4-year ban, then that's a massive deterrent.
But who can afford 4 years with no salary? And most people aren't earning 20 million a fight. So you're essentially forcing them out of the sport. And the reason I think this is perhaps murkier than it seems on the surface is one of the biggest problems is teams doping their fighter without the fighter's knowledge.
And that's probably one of the scariest things if you're a fighter, isn't it? But if you were to test positive for something that let's say you hire a nutritionist, they're meant to be like one of the best nutritionists in the sport, blah blah blah. You're going to trust everything they're giving to you and that it's safe and whatever. But that's not necessarily going to be the case, is it?
And that's the problem. It's like, not to relate it to someone else, but in this country, I'm personally glad we don't have the death penalty, because imagine if you're wrongly convicted. It's almost like, is it worth having it, if one person is wrongly sentenced to death, you could argue that you shouldn't do it at all. And again, it's a moral dilemma. And I feel like that about this. If someone's going to lose their whole career as a consequence of being, 4 to 5 years, you've gone. I'm sorry, you are gone. If you're not playing a sport or participating in the fight game, what you're doing, you're going to lose it. Just sparring in the gym's not the same. You're not going to be able to fund it. You're going to have to find alternative work, unless you are literally a top draw multi-millionaire fighter. You're out of the game.
There's a couple of things there. There needs to be an education piece. So you need like the Boxing Board of Control, working with UCAD, going into boxing gyms, because that's where you're going to have the central fighters all boxing out of certain gyms. You need them to go into these gyms, say to them, look, this is what's legal, this is what's not legal, this is how you should deal with your food, and you need that education piece there. And there just isn't the funds for it.
But how does that help me
because if you start the education from, let's say for example, you've got a boxer just starting out and you're getting educated from a young age, then it should be intrinsic in that, okay, this is what I should be doing in terms of processes and to make sure that you're a clean athlete.
But how do you make sure if you are, look, the tracking they have to do is insane, right? You have to say where you are, where you're going to be, but like your whole life is like being a robot. But like scheduled, everything I have, I can't even eat at a restaurant is a risk, right? Yeah. But then my doctors and trainers are doping me without me knowing, right? I can do everything right. I record everything, every supplement I send off to whatever governing body, that I'm under. I've tracked everything. I'm eating perfect. I'm doing it. So how do I know if they're sprinkling?
What about if it was based on certain drugs? Then maybe if there's certain drugs which only could be found in performance, like major performance enhancing drugs.
Wait, hang on,
and you base it off that for certain time period for certain drugs. So if it's something that is can usually be contamination, then maybe you only get a 1 or 2 year ban. But if it's something where steroids, you're gonna have it's only gonna be injected into you if you really want it to be, then you get a 4 year ban.
Okay. But what happens in a lot of sports, right? So you, let's say you hurt your shoulder, okay? Big problem for a boxer. So they give you an injection. Look, we're going to put an injection in. We're going to give you a steroid in the shoulder, which is, by the way, completely accepted therapy. But they happen to give you something on top, which is the source. How can a fighter ever truly know what they're doing isn't or is complying or breaking the rules? They can never know. So if their team this is one of the arguments for PEDs is the fairest way to level the playing field is to say everyone can do whatever you want, right? Now, the unfair part of that is some people don't want to put foreign substances into their system. I get that. But you could. As soon as you say you can't, there's all these people. I genuinely...
Benny, it feels like you got that good devil and that bad devil on the shoulder. It's like
just a taste. Just have a taste. It just reminds me of Eubank Senior.
Yeah.
And when Ben popped, in fact, I think it was Eubank Senior. I can't remember if it was Ben.
Go on, say it,
or if it was Eubank Senior. But I thought Eubank Senior was like, I don't think that he's cheated.
Oh yeah.
I think his team have cheated. Yeah. And that to me was like, I'd never considered that before, to be honest. But it's the best way. What do you want? If you pop, you want someone who has no doubt in his mind. When they're arguing, they're on camera. There's no micro expression giving away that they're lying. You want them emphatic. I did not do this. I do everything right. Blah, 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 blah. Right? It's the most defensible you could make it. And of course, if I'm part of someone's camp, my wages, generally speaking, are a percentage of what they get paid. So I'm incentivized to help them to win against their knowledge. If I think that I can get away with it, and look, designer drugs tend to be ahead of the testing. So Baz, you said earlier about the higher up you get, the more likely you are to do it and pop. I think the higher up you are, the less likely you are to pop, because the more expensive PEDs and therefore the more advanced. And the lower down, the higher the risk, because you can't get the good stuff that's more likely to be masked.
But that just depends on testing again, though, doesn't it? I mean, if these lower end fighters are not getting tested at all, then who's
that's true. True.
But yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I know what you're saying. There's plenty of grey areas where
you made me think about it a lot more deeper than I thought I was going to.
Yeah.
Like, if in my mind it was clear cut, but you put some levels of doubt in my mind about what we should be doing next. But
what was it clear cut? I'm interested because none of us has said our position and why.
Well, my thought process was, if you test positive once, and let's say, for example, there's this just like if you've got a high level of banned substance in your body, then you should get a big ban, not career ending ban, but first off, and that's that 2 to 4 year mark. And then if it happens again, that's it, you're out. And that's the only way you're going to dissuade and put people off taking the chance. That was my thought process beforehand. But then you're putting into my mind all these other little nuances that could happen with the teams. And what I'm trying to think of the exact words that the British Boxing Board use. It's gone from my head now, but it's basically, you are responsible for what goes into your body, and that's why the fault lies with you, and that's how they run.
But that's like the government in this country saying ignorance of the law is no excuse, so they can prosecute you for any law that exists, right? But that's the biggest pile of BS I've ever heard, because you have legal teams that specialize in divorce, company law, X law, Y law, blah blah, right? So you have specialists in all law, and they go, oh, I can't do that, I can't do divorce, I don't know about it, I can't. And neither lawyers or solicitors and briefs in this country, right? So you've got professionals that have gone and got degrees and master's degrees and are practicing professionals in one element of the law, which they still have to read up about on certain things. They don't know about the breadth of it, and yet us as laymen are meant to understand, are meant to know and be aware of every law that exists and might be there in our place. It's the same with this. I don't have autonomy over my body. What am I meant to do? Every injection that a doctor wants to give me, I then have to send it off for test. Like, that's just so impractical. And the reason, to a normal person at home, that might sound like, well, I never get injections. Like, of course, the rare time that comes up, I could do that. Or I never have to take tablets apart from ibuprofen, and I know it's Nurofen.
Right. If you do it for food, it's a different thing.
You have to do it for all your food, and you're an athlete, so you're injured all the time. Like athletes are generally injured all the time anyway, but combat athletes, obviously, it's exponential because they're taking more damage, and they're always going into fights injured. They're never 100%. So they're taking all kinds of things to manage pain and injuries and recovery.
Tips, your paracetamols, any standard drug might have something in it. You never know.
Anything.
But I guess the argument for it, I mean, we're bloodlust boxing, so but looking on the safer side of things, when it comes to boxing and combat sports, if you get it wrong, is it better to be wrong on the side of keeping any potential tainted fighter out of the sport rather than risking having them in? Is it err on the side of caution on that side of it? Is that an argument there? I don't know. But then there is the other argument, obviously, that if you've got someone who's willing to punch someone in the head and take punches to the head, then, you know, does it even matter? But
well, that's the autonomy argument, right? They've got it, by banning a substance, you take away their autonomy.
Yeah.
And don't I have the right to put what I want in my body? Well, yeah, until you want to hit someone else. Yeah. And now we, as a governing body, as an example, have it's incumbent upon us to protect you from yourself and the other fighters from you. So this is why it's grey, and I don't think there's a right answer, but I'm interested in Baz's answer.
Mine. You know what? You guys are just confused the hell out of me, to be honest. Because I was quite set in my ways. I was under the impression that
just take the PEDs, Baz. Just take it.
I don't know, man. I don't know where I stand with it now. I mean, it's just ridiculous. At a higher level now, there needs to be more funding no matter what. Whatever the decision is and how they're going to go forward, there needs to be more funding in the sport of boxing. Because at the moment, there's not really no government funding into the sport of boxing. These small time clubs.
Yeah, boxing's it's not on the favourite government list of sports. You saw with COVID that there was no funding to boxing. but
No.
you had things like volleyball and getting funding when
That is ridiculous. No one plays volleyball.
and like not to hate on volleyball, but when you look at the benefits that boxing does to local communities, you had Matchroom going in and
Eddie
they were
Hearn recently was talking about he just paid that he's done that club 10 grand and he's given them
exactly.
support.
And I think there's been more funding coming through a private supporter. I heard today because they saw the story and they wanted to help out. Government should be doing that, and because you've got these kids, some of them who've just got they've
got no place to be. They've got no home.
The
gym is their home.
You're going well off track. What has funding grassroots boxing got to do?
I think the idea is that basically boxing
testing?
is just not got that level of support from government.
It shouldn't have. The government. I'm sorry. You only need PED testing because you only need it in professional boxing, right? That's all you need. So for me, and if you go amateurs as it goes into the Olympics, right? So that then those bodies should pay for it. But and there's a whole argument about the money that's made in the Olympics, etc. But if you are performing, someone's making money from it, whether it's amateur as part of Olympics and lower things relative to that, or you're professionals as boxers, someone's making money. So they're the people that should be funding it. This is the thing. You've got to look at the business of it and the economics. That's why the UFC paid for it, right? So you need the people who benefit.
I don't think it's enough though. I honestly don't think it's enough.
This is what I'm thinking about in regards to the governing side of it as well, because boxing is so fragmented, especially at UK level. Like, forget going global. At UK level, it's fragmented as hell. You need like someone with some sort of official jurisdiction, which is going to say, actually, you Ben Shalom, you Frank Warren, you Eddie Hearn, you can't decide between yourselves and sort it out. And the British Boxing Board of Control can't sort it out. We're going to come in. This is what going to be the standard of the official standard going forward for testing, for everything. Just to have like a basic standing, but it's like if you don't adhere to that, then you can't practice boxing or promote boxing in the UK. That's what I think needs to happen now, because as much as I'm anti governance went from above at government level, it kind of almost has to happen with boxing, because it's
the British Boxing Board of Control has got no funding behind them, so
it's not going to sort it out.
But it needs to do anything.
It needs funding as well,
But then that funding should come from the promoters. There should
there's nothing to force them into doing that.
There is. You can make it a law, right? You can say that there's enough laws on enough silly subjects. This is something that I'm sure is complex to get over the line, but ultimately that it is in order to get their licensing of a fight, X is required, and probably there would be nuance based on size of the fight, purse, experience of the fighter, etc. I'm not going to test someone in their first fight the same way I'm going to test Wilder, Fury, or AJ in a fight, etc. But I do think there should be some standard. There should be some percentage of the purse that funds it. That's the easy way to me. You say X of the purse, X percentage funds the required testing, and there would be a tranche-based set of testing. So at this level, we do X tests randomly over the period, 1 to 3, and at the higher level we do it more regularly. Bigger purse, we can afford to do more, etc. And at least that would mean, as the stakes become higher and the likelihood of cheating increases, therefore you have got more opportunity to catch people. My issue with it is it doesn't solve the ethical dilemma of is it the right thing or not, and how do you attach a process to that allows for all of the challenges relative to testing, positive testing, false positives, due process off the back of a positive. You make sure that the mud doesn't stick. You make sure everyone has the opportunity to have that due process and clear their name when it hasn't happened. So how would you do that? Just as an example, how would you treat someone pops? Now, if you design the process assuming they're guilty, it looks very different in my mind to if you design the process assuming they're innocent. And if you go, imagine if it was you you popped, you're innocent. What would you want that journey to look like? Because the first thing you want is that it just never comes out and your name's not associated with it, because mud sticks.
Yeah.
So as soon as it comes out, it doesn't matter whether you're clear or not. As soon as someone clears the name, especially in boxing, which is like the most crooked sport in the world, you're like, well, that, you know, your name's been cleared doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing what happened with Conor Ben, because it was leaked, the fact that his positive test came out. So if it wasn't the fact that it's leaked, it wouldn't have come out at that time.
They tried to sweep it. Eddie Hearn's been annihilated. I don't know if you've seen him go on the podcast with Simon and
Simon Jordan. Yeah.
And I think Eddie's come off very well there, by the way. And I think this time round, when he had to deal with it, he stepped correct and realised, you know, righted some of the wrongs from last time. But it's a very dangerous, messy process. And again, you've got to consider, if you're going to test and if you're going to have banned substances, how do you have a fair process that doesn't penalise people that are going to be wrongly accused as a consequence of false positives? I don't know if you've done COVID tests before, boys. Like, you can be fine and you test positive, or vice versa. You know, like, just as an example of, you know, you can't trust anything 100%, right?
Yeah, and I think the timing is key as well, because you don't want to be waiting years for a result to be finalised. You want to know within a set period of time from when the test happens, from when an adverse finding comes up to any appeals process, that kind of thing. It needs to be done all in a space of almost like 6 months. It shouldn't be going longer than 6 months, no way. Which is what's been going on with this whole Conor Ben situation. The Amir Khan thing as well, I didn't mention it earlier because Amir Khan obviously tested positive. That was kept very quiet, and then I think there was some sort of appeals process in the background, but in the end, he said, "Look, it's in my system. Whatever it is, I don't know where it's come from.
I'll take the ban.
I'll take the ban." He's semi-retired anyway.
He was retired anyway.
And then it's been dealt with, but it's not that from start to end. Even that process, even though we weren't aware of a lot of what was going on or any of it until the decision was made, took quite a while. So I think the timing is the thing as well. It needs to be slick.
What's the process for you? Like, what should it look like? How do you hide the fighter that's got the issue? Because presumably the test pops before the fight in let's say half the cases, and you know, you pop before the fight. Do you have to call the fight off? Well, if you call the fight off, everyone knows that it's relative to a fighter popping. So there's going to be speculation.
You can almost hide the fact by saying there's an injury, but then again, that's kind of a grey area there as well. If you say there's an injury when there's not actually an injury, there's an adverse finding, but that's one way of doing it potentially.
Or you can say you're retired.
Or like Amir Khan, yeah.
And someone else.
Yeah, I think as soon as you say something's up, then there'll be people sniffing around to see what's gone on. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I'm conscious of time. Final thoughts, Ben. So I don't have a clue where you stand on this. I've
been sitting here highly conscious that I asked you both and then swerved having to have a response.
But
he's been slipping that jab all night, hasn't he?
For me,
you've definitely given us something to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that it is probably necessary to have testing. Just, you know, I do believe that people should have autonomy over their bodies and be able to do what they want until it affects other people. And once it impacts other people, then as a society, we've got a right to have our input as to what that should and shouldn't look like. So yes, I do think there should be testing, but it's not perfect. You know, I'm not happy with the system. I would want to improve the process and how it's dealt with. I think as soon as you say it's an injury, everyone goes, oh, it's an injury, right, one of them's popped. It's fine the first time, as we've discussed it, you know, oh, we'll just say it's an injury. But very quickly, once that's the rules, you know, everyone then knows. But I would clean up the process. I think that I would make it incumbent upon all promoters to pay X%, and I would standardize the testing, and then people can opt into additional testing if they want, but at least we know there's a minimum standard, and that would change based on the size of the fight. I would unban recreational drugs so that fighters have, because we haven't talked about that. But I think
don't just swing that left
Just
hook in
throw
there,
that in
bro.
right at the end. That's a whole nother segment, that is. But
You waited till hang on. You waited till the 3 minutes was over before you hit that shot.
Just thought I'd slip it in before you had time to debate me. But I think, what has it got to do with us if someone likes to smoke something or, have a party? It's not performance
depends when you're
enhancing.
taking cocaine or not, and then you're just going to box the next day.
But, there's some recreational drugs that stay in your system for a long time, right? And let's be honest, marijuana is probably the obvious one. Now, there are good arguments about it is performance enhancing to a degree because it aids recovery, but then don't we want to aid recovery? Where's the line with medicine, recovery, injury prevention, injury cure? It's a very sticky wicket, and I think some of these things probably need to be addressed.
Yeah. No, I like that.
I'm looking forward to the comment section on this one. Baz, any final thoughts?
I just can't believe you threw that in there at the end like that.
Just hit that like button and subscribe.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be more due diligence on it, and then the funding needs to be there, of course. Otherwise, it's never going to happen in the first place. But yeah, I mean, let's see what happens. The next coming months will be telling, because there's going to be a lot more drugs tests going on, and we'll see what happens with that. How they deal with the recent ones. They should have more experience in it now. So,
right,
Yusuf, what are you saying?
I just, yeah.
That's it.
It's been a journey. I just can't speak. But
Well,
yeah, I'm gonna agree to disagree, but I'm not sure what I'm disagreeing on.
You just enjoy disagreeing.
I'm just gonna disagree. I'm just gonna play the Simon Jordan card and just disagree against anything you guys say. But
you just got an agenda, so that's what it is.
got an agenda, talk about agenda, yeah. But yeah, it's just I think for me, something needs to be done because it's happening more and more, or not even happening more and more. It's just we're known about it more and more, and you can't. I guess that's the good thing, but something needs to be done in regards to cleaning it up. So, well,
And on
anyway,
that bombshell,
if you haven't already, hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks, Ben,
Cheers.
for jumping on again. It's good to have you, and we'll be grabbing your thoughts and some other stuff as well, like in the coming weeks, I'm sure.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Take care. Thanks very much.